All right. Hey, good afternoon, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Thursday, September 26, 2024. This is your afternoon update on Major Hurricane Helene, now on final approach to the Big Bend region of Florida. A powerful, just ferocious hurricane getting ready to come into Florida's Big Bend, and this will produce tremendous impacts not only in Florida but up the eastern seaboard into Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and even some neighboring areas as well. Helene will be a very destructive hurricane, and every preparation hopefully was undertaken for the storm. Just a few hours from landfall now, and it looks like it's going to be as bad as we thought all along. Helene has rapidly intensified throughout the day and is now a major hurricane, a category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson scale with winds of 120 miles per hour. The central pressure has fallen to about 955 or so millibars, and further intensification is likely as the storm makes its final run to the coast. Heavy weather is overspreading into Georgia and South Carolina. Rain less over Florida right now, but still a lot of wind impacts are moving up the coast, and a heavy rain event is about to go underway from Tallahassee all the way up to Asheville, North Carolina. Latest in the National Hurricane Center, movement to the north-northeast at 16 miles per hour. There's been a lot of talk about eastward adjustments. Oh, and we're showing you the 1 p.m. cone, but they are issuing hourly updates now until landfall. And at the 2 p.m. update, the hurricane hunters found those winds of 120 miles per hour. And again, that pressure, 959 last check, but some indications are it might be even lower than that through the last pass. Again, hurricane and tropical storm warnings in effect. Those hurricane warnings go all the way up to about Macon, Georgia. They're not far from Atlanta. If that gives you any idea how much wind this is going to carry inland. And tropical storm warnings remain in effect for the entirety of Florida, sans the last few counties of the Panhandle, much of eastern and far southeast Alabama, all of Georgia, and that's not under a hurricane warnings and a tropical storm warning, and parts of all of South Carolina also in a tropical storm warning, and then much of North Carolina as well. I want to talk about that eastward adjustment a little bit. People have been talking about this like eastward trend in the models and everything else. And I want to show you the last 5 or 6 Hurricane Center forecasts. This is the most recent one. And I'm going to go back 2 or 3 frames or so. And I want you to watch right where the center of that line is. Okay. Have we noticed that the line hasn't really changed? The most it's moved is from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. last night. They bumped it about 10 miles or so to the east. But the Hurricane Center, since the first advisory, has locked in at the northern tip of that Apalachee Bay area. That's where they've had this storm coming in all along. It's never been forecast to come into Tampa. It's never been forecast to come into Cedar Key directly, anyway. Again, lots of impacts, but the eye of the hurricane has been forecast since the start to come in right about Apalachee Bay. A lot of computer models are dragging this off to the east like pretty significantly at the last minute, and a lot of them are global models, and our global models do not handle events like this all that well when we're this close to a landfall. Using the GFS or the Euro to forecast the last 6 hours of this hurricane's final track to the coast is like using a sledgehammer to put a finishing nail in your wall. Like, you can do it. It's just not very smart. And that's kind of what I want to harp on with this, is that at this point, this storm is going to come into that northern Apalachee Bay area. I mean, at most, it might wind up just off to the right side of the area, but not much. This is not going to careen straight into Tampa Bay or careen straight into here or Gainesville or anywhere like that. It is going to pretty much move some component like this to the north, to the northeast, through its landfall. Earlier today, we saw convective bursts, and when you see a powerful and quickly intensifying hurricane, you have bursts of thunderstorms that'll pop up on one side of the eye. The storm will kind of lurch up under them, and then those thunderstorms will rotate around the hurricane, and then the eye will kind of follow them. So oftentimes, especially in a strong hurricane, if you draw the actual track of the eye, instead of being like this, it's more like this, where it comes up. So watching those short-term trends, I mean, they are important, but, if we follow along where the storm was this morning and where it is right now, it's pretty much just on the other side of the 85-degree parallel. Again, it looks like, if we map this out in a steady northeast motion, it's the top of Apalachee Bay, and it has been from the start. It's just been frustrating when there's been a lot of people in comment sections are saying, well, my local news is saying it's coming in well east, and the Weather Channel is showing these weird graphics where it's like winding up in the other side of the state, and it's just that's not what's happening right now. We haven't seen any trends to suggest that Helene is taking some massive eastward shift. And the thing I want to point out is the wind field of this storm is tremendous. It is encapsulating the entire state of Florida. So if, say, you're like here, if I move this hurricane 20, 30 miles either way, 50 miles either way, it doesn't matter. You're getting basically the same hurricane. Yes, those adjustments matter a lot for, say, Tallahassee and some of these communities on the back end of it that might be spared the worst winds, but you can't prepare. Like if you're in Tallahassee, a 20-mile jog to the east might bring your winds down 20, 30 miles per hour. It might be a significant decrease in your maximum winds you receive, in your rainfall to a degree. But, if I move the storm back or whatever, the point being is you can't prepare for that. You can't go, oh, well, I'm going to hope it jogs east and not do X, Y, or Z or not evacuate because I'm only expecting 65-mile-an-hour gusts instead of 95. But the storm could very well stay on track, and then you're going to get 95-mile-an-hour gusts. So even the messaging at this point saying, oh, well, we really got to watch these last tiny wobbles. Like, this is a storm that is 500 to 600 miles wide. In fact, the National Hurricane Center in their afternoon discussion reiterated that this storm is reemphasized that it is, in fact, comparing the system with previous hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico, Helene is at the upper bounds in terms of size. I mean, we are talking like this is one of the biggest hurricanes we've seen in the Gulf of Mexico. This is not just moving this 20, 30 miles either way, besides a few towns might save them. But this is an after the fact that, as it turns out, it went 30 miles east and my area on the west side got it better. But you can't prepare for that at this point. And I hope that makes sense to people. So when if your news station or Jim Bob, whoever's weather page is like, oh, look out, the GFS run has it east, like, it doesn't matter at this point. You should have prepared for a major hurricane if you're anywhere in this area, and especially if you're anywhere in this cone, you should be preparing for the absolute worst of Helene's wrath, and this is going to have a lot of wrath with it. Let's go ahead and take a look at some recent regional observations over here on the Aviation Weather Center, looking at observations. We'll start up in Jacksonville. Currently 26 knots, or about 30 miles per hour. That seems to be their highest gust in the last hour. Not too bad so far. Moving down towards Gainesville, checking in. You guys are also right at about 30 miles per hour. Further down to the south, we can take a look out towards the Space Coast. They're at about 35 near the coast. Not surprising. Over here in Tampa Bay, we've got a peak wind in the last hour of 39 knots, or about 45 miles per hour. And then further down, we can see that some 50 to 55 mile an hour wind gusts have been hitting parts of Southwest Florida, again, where those stronger winds are. This kind of wind here will be spreading up into Tampa Bay in the next few hours, over north of Lake Okeechobee, about 40 miles per hour, and then back towards Tallahassee and whatnot. Not so much yet, mostly a heavy rainfall event for parts of the western Florida area. The winds have not really picked up there yet. A few more hours before those pressure falls really start to kick in that area. So bad news, though, is that this wind is spreading up the coast. But again, across Florida, you can see not a ton of rainfall, very light in terms of total rainfall. I don't think the peninsula of Florida outside of this landfall zone is going to get a ton of rain from this. But we can see further north where a heavy rainfall event has already been underway, a precursor rain event, as they often call them in these things. And this is one of the things we're going to have to talk about as being a widespread major flooding event for northern Georgia, some of South Carolina, North Carolina, and even right on the border of Tennessee. We'll talk about that in just a second. But looking at other impacts from Helene to come, 15 to 20 feet of storm surge. And guys, whether I put the storm in Carabel or the northern Apalachee Bay or over here by, Cedar Key or Perry or whatever, it doesn't matter. This is going to be a unsurvivable storm surge in this region. 20 feet of storm surge is very high. It is about as high as you're going to see a forecast from the National Hurricane Center on an official level. Please heed any local evacuations. I already stomped my foot on this as much as I could yesterday, but please heed and get out of this immediate area where you see these pinks and these 10 to 15s and 15 to 20s. It's going to be a tremendous life-threatening storm surge when it comes in. Rainfall to come. The high risk has now been including all of central Georgia. They basically connected the Tallahassee area all the way up to north of Asheville. So This is a high risk area for a hurricane that touches the border of North Carolina and Virginia and runs all the way back down to Tallahassee. Reason being, our upper level low has been focusing and training Helene's moisture in a right between the high and the low, high pressure off the coast, low pressure over Little Rock and Memphis. And Helene's moisture has been funneling up from the Gulf of Mexico, and an antecedent or precedent rain event has already saturated this area with a bunch of rainfall. The WPC's discussion puts this pretty well. They say for the reasoning of combining those high-risk areas, there's going to be a lot of winds knocking out power, down trees, and blocked drainage. 4+ inches of rain already falls across this region. And, you kind of have the terrain influencing a lot of this with the winds, those moist winds hitting the mountains and being lifted up, causing more rainfall. The 24-hour rainfall totals could be another 8 to 12 inches on top of the 4 to 6 that already fell. And these are big numbers, but I think even people in Florida are like, well, 4 to 6 isn't a ton, but if you get further north, that's a lot of rain. And you're in areas that aren't flat and don't have as much ways to get that water out as Florida does, it's going to be bad. So widespread, high risk area of rainfall for this region, and the flooding threat really cannot be understated today and even into tomorrow, where that moderate risk still is in place for western North Carolina. So again, rainfall still to come here, 3 to 5 inches. In most cases, a lot people will get more. One second. Excuse me. Looking at the wind gust potential here, 18Z RTMA matching up really well with kind of an experimental model from NOAA, their RFS model. So I'm going to run this forward, way too far forward apparently. Back this up here to show you potential wind gusts as this comes in. God, Pivotal. I love Pivotal, man. Their site is annoying to work with sometimes. So we can see by this evening, the hurricane will be just a few hours from landfall or just about to make landfall. And widespread wind gusts, 80 to 90 miles an hour in this Big Bend area, increasing to over 100 as the eye moves in. But you can see by this evening, 52 miles an hour in Jacksonville, 63 towards Gainesville, and about 51, 52 back towards Orlando. And those high gusts, 50 to 60, still coming up the Florida Peninsula. As we click this forward and to the landfall point, you can see well over 100 in some of those eastern counties to the right of the eye, and some 60 to 70 mile an hour winds getting into Georgia already by that late evening tonight. This is about 8, 10 o'clock in the evening, about 11 o'clock actually for Eastern time. So this is going to be about the worst of it, about 7 or 8 o'clock down to about 1 to 2 in the morning for the landfall point for Jacksonville. Few hours earlier for the central Florida area. And then we can see by tonight, wind gusts up 95 miles an hour for parts of southeast Georgia, and south central Georgia rather, as the eye moves in. And notice how remarkably well the hurricane holds together for several hours after, before the core begins to degrade, going into the morning hours with still heavy gusts on that right side of the cone. So these hurricane warnings in Georgia have to be taken as seriously as you can. It's going to be a big deal. Looking at some stuff for Jacksonville, as we talked about, generally wind gusts in the 50s and 60s. That's going to be the main thing. This is going to pretty much be picking up right around dinner time. After about 7 to 8 o'clock at night, that's when you're really going to feel it start picking up in earnest. And you're going to have about 7, 8 at night to about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning where you're going to have the worst of that weather. And then it will trail off from there, but it's going to take until a few hours after sunrise for it to really calm down. But the worst of the storm will be tonight and then just past midnight overnight. Tornado threat still to come, enhanced risk along the coastline. Tornado watches are up across the area from the Florida Keys all the way up to the South Carolina, North Carolina border. Several tornadoes have already been spotted on radar. I mean, it's going to be several more tonight, and these watches will last into the night and into tomorrow as well. So that's what I got for you guys on Hurricane Helene. I probably will do another Facebook Live later this evening as the storm approaches, maybe in a couple hours. We'll see how it goes. I enjoyed the one last night. So until then, guys, stay safe. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.